Hello everyone, and welcome to the next episode of our small series about dealing with colors in the Darktable. In this episode we will use color balance RGB again, and before we get started I would like to suggest to set up your Darktable to the so-called scene referred workflow. I will repeat quick how to do this. Go to the global preferences, to the processing tab, and choose those two options, scene referred and modern, by auto apply pixel workload defaults and auto apply chromatic adaptation defaults. Now when you do that, just close your preferences, and if you want to edit your photos in this workflow, you need to delete old history. So you can select your photos, go to the discharge crystal history here, and history will be discharged and ready for editing in scene referred workflow. Okay, before we get started, I would like to address one important point, and for that I have prepared one gradient. And as you can see, this is not a linear gradient but a logarithmic gradient. You can recognize this also here on our waveform, and it follows this rule here, and that is the gradient which is adjusted to our vision. Our vision is not linear, like for example a vision of our camera sensor. We perceive luminosity on that logarithmic way. That means the middle gray, which is the optimal area for viewing, is not in the middle but somewhere here by 18%. You can see this is mid gray and this is white, that frame here, and mid gray is somewhere here. Okay, why is that important? In the contrast to the last one, we have now another gradient, a linear gradient. You can recognize it here also in our waveform, and this is how the luminosity is represented in the real world. And we have the mid gray in the middle now, and this is how also our camera sensor perceive that luminosity in the real world. That means proportional to the luminosity in the real world. Now when we shooting that raw files, they have that linearity, and the problem is we perceive that linearity as very flat. We need much more contrast in the darker area, as you can see from the last gradient. Now that needs to be adjusted first, and camera manufacturer have already some kind of curve, their own curves, which they apply. If you, for example, want to shoot JPEGs, they apply on that raw data, and you have the result which is much pleasant for our vision. How the raw developer software deal with that? Raw developing software try to mimic that curve by adding it at the start of the development of raw file, and Darktable has base curve for that. I will demonstrate that by using something like Nikon, like that's my camera, and you can see now that linear luminosity is adjusted to our vision by using that typical curve for my manufacturer. But I can also use some others, and depends on what kind of camera you have, this curve will be automatically adapted and adjusted in the Darktable, and that is then the starting point of developing of raw file. Now that is so-called display referred workflow. Darktable has also another kind of a workflow, so-called scene referred workflow. And what is the difference? The difference is that in scene referred workflow, we're developing our photo without that initial adaptation to our perception, which means through the fact that we are working in the linear color space, we're developing our picture physically correct. And only at the end, we have one module, Filmic, which primarily deals as tone mapper, which applies some kind of the curve. And what kind of curve is that? So let's turn the Filmic on to be able to see with what kind of curve we are dealing with. Now we will start Filmic. And this curve is quite similar to this one. And as you can see, at the end of our development of the photo, Filmics try to remap that range of our photo, the tonal range, by reproducing the tone curve and color response of classic on analog film. For example, like this one, Kodak Professional or something else. That is the point of the Filmic. And now, because Filmic as tone mapper also protects our highlights and shadows, we are now able to use whole dynamic range of our raw file to shift our mid-gray back and forth, for example, with help of exposure module. As you can see, now a mid-gray is here, excuse me, or here. You can shift it to our liking without introducing any artifacts. And at the end, we have that remapped to some curve which simulates that analog film look. That's all what you need to know to deal with a scene referred workflow. Now, let's go back to our main topic, and I would like to use this gradient to demonstrate how color balance RGB deals with colors. So let's adjust it first. Now, in the last episodes, we have used that master tab. Now let's see what happens with those sliders in the 4 ways tab. Now, as you can see, we have 4 groups: global offset, shadow lift, highlights gain, and power functions. And let's try to move the sliders and see what happens on our gradient. Let's start first with the global offset. We will move now global offset luminance slider and see what happens on our gradient. As you can see, darker areas are getting lighter or opposite. And let's see what kind of area is that. How far is the influence of the luminance of the global offset? Back and forth. So something like, just a moment, influencing something like that here. We are darkening and brightening this area. Now let's see what happens with shadows lift. What area will be influenced there? Okay, let's move that back and forth. As you can see, area of influence is this one. Let's go with highlights gain. Let's move the highlights back and forth. Now, highlights are influencing this area. And at the end, what happens with power? Back and forth. Back and forth. And as you can see, power influencing the most of the area, something like that. Now, we have global offset, then shadows lift, then highlights gain, something like here. and at the end power, which influences mostly the midtones. Something like that. Okay, these are luminance slider. Let's see what happens when we move now the color sliders. For sake of demonstration, we will set up ourselves one small task. So let's say here we have sun and here we have some stars or something like that. So the task is to mimic that nice sunset here. Okay, let's see how can we do that with those color sliders. And let's start with global offset. So global offset works somewhere here, as you can see before. So let's delete that. So that means we need some kind of blue there. So we move here our hue slider to that blue. I will say something like that. And by moving chroma, I'm adding color to that area of influence from global offset. Now I can also move just a tiny bit of luminance there so that I have nice blue. Okay, the next is shadows. That is the next part, somewhere here. Okay, let's give shadows some other blue. That means we move our hue to that blue. I will set something like that. And add also a tiny bit of chroma. Now we have a transition between those two colors. Let's do that also for highlights. And for highlights we need some yellow. Let's use this one. Add some chroma. And for that midtone area, we will use power for that and move that hue slider to some orange color and add some chroma. Now we have mimicked a little bit that nice sunset, but let's see how can we improve that even more. To improve that, we can use now the mask slider, and we have some masks here, 3 masks. Let's see what happens when we turn on indication for that mask. For example, for shadow fall off, and move that slider. As you can see, we have now, by moving shadow fall off slider to the right, we have more of the shadows here, and also we tighten that transition between shadows and the rest. So let's go back. Let's see what happens when we are dealing with mid-gray. As you can see, we are shifting that mid-gray towards the highlights, but also tightening that mid-grays if we are moving that slider to the left. You can see before and after. And let's do that also for highlights fall off. Let's move it back and forth, back and forth. So similar to the shadows fall off, we are shifting that highlights towards midtones, but also sharpening that transition, as you can see. Okay, let's turn off those masking and try to deal with those sliders to improve our transitions here. So let's move, for example, shadows a bit back, add mid-gray or remove mid-gray, and remove highlights fall off a little bit. let's see. Now it doesn't look nice. That looks much better now. But we have also white fulcrum here. And white fulcrum we can set up automatically, but sometimes you can use it to shift that midtones towards highlights also. For example, something like that, as you can see. Now we have nice transition now. Contrast gray fulcrum is if we are adding contrast here, but we don't adding any contrast, we can just adjust it automatically. And as you can see, we have now that transition, which can be influenced also with those masks here. You don't need to go in math behind that. You can already see what happens. Now we can go back and improve even more that color. For example, I can add more chroma to that global offset and so on. But you know now how to deal with colors in color balance RGB. Let's try to do that. For example, for watercolor, let's try to mimic clear water. For example, we have here blues in the global offset and shadow. We can leave it there. But now for highlights we can use some green here, and for power we can use some other blue, something like that. Maybe remove a bit chroma from the global offset and from dark parts, and we have now another gradient for, let's say, clear water now. And with mask we can improve that by shifting those sliders also a bit more. That's all what you need to know how to deal with that 4 ways and masks tab. So let's use this photo for demonstration how to use color balance to improve the colors of the photo. And I will first do some adjustments quick so that we can see how the photo looks like and what needs to be done. Let's move a bit of Filmic. I don't want to describe every step because I've done that in episodes before. So you can watch those episodes. That was 40, 41 and 42 episodes. So watch that first if you want to know what I'm doing. I'm going now to the color balance, add some color intensity to the photo. Something like that. Maybe add a tiny bit of local contrast. And I would like to darken a little bit sky with tone equalizer. Just a tiny little bit, quick, without too much working on it. And we have now a nice starting point for dealing with colors. And let's analyze that photo a little bit first. So let's improve first white balance a little bit. I think the white balance is quite good, but let's see what can we do by pressing at white balance, what we haven't achieved. Okay, that's not what I like, so let's bring it back. I don't know, something like that. Okay, that's okay. And I would like to have a little bit more blue on the sky. That's so that we have different colors. We have now greens and blue and a little bit of reds here. And let's do that first. So I will use channel mixer for that. So I will remove a tiny bit of red by using input blue or ratio of blue, but compensate that by adding back some red. maybe even more. Let's see. Not too much, just a tiny bit, so that we have that bluish sky before and after. And okay, let's see now what else needs to be done with the colors. And as you can see, we have a lot of shades of green. The darker greens are also a bit colder greens, and the higher greens, or the greens with much more brightness, are also a bit warmer. That is one point. The second point is we have now a little bit bluish sky, and we have some kind of a reddish area there, and that needs to be improved or enhanced. So let's use color balance RGB. I will use another instance so that I don't need to repeat that process if I made some mistakes. And we go to the 4 ways, and as we have seen, let's see how to deal with the greens here. So the darker greens, that means that shadowy parts need a bit colder color. So let's use global offset, tiny bit, and also shadows, tiny bit, to darken those areas. Now we need to, not to darken, but to give it a blue touch. And by highlights, we need something like some warmer color. Let's add a bit of yellow there, something like that. And I don't know, maybe in the midtones also. Let's see if that works. Just everything, just a tiny bit. And let's see what can we do with the masks. Let's see what happens if I move the midtone. Yeah, that's a bit better. Something like that, nothing complicated. Okay. Before and after. Now we have that tiny bit yellowish look. I would like to adjust it even more by using shadows. I need more bluish green in the darker areas. Oh, that's too much. Let's go too far. Something like that. Now let's add some saturation to that and see how it looks after. Maybe we can also use a highlights gain and power function to influence those colors. Okay. Before and after. As you can see, I've just improved a tiny bit the colors of the photo, but I will also influence the sky, what I don't want. But let's see first how it looks before and after. Let's go to the lens correction, or maybe to exposure, add snapshot, and go to the last step. It looks much better now, color wise, as you can see. But there's a better way. Let's try that again, but this time we will use multiple instances of color balance, and we will try to influence that color groups with each instance of color balance RGB. For example, we will have one instance for greens, one instance for blue, and one instance for red, and we'll see how can we combine that to improve that colors much better than with only one instance of color balance. Now we have the duplicate of our photo, and without that, color adjustments with color balance. And we will see how can we combine those colors by using some rules of harmony of colors. And therefore we have Paletone here. That is one online site which can help you to combine your colors. Now we need to analyze what kind of combination, what kind of harmony we need here. Since we have the main color green, that's our primary color, with that shades, I will use that second adjacent colors, 3 colors together, with complementary color. Now I need to turn that to the green, and as you can see, here is our preview, and let's see how can we adjust that color combination even better. Now we have here primary color green with some secondary colors on the sides and complementary color red. And this combination is not bad, but I would like to improve it just a tiny bit. Maybe I will go just a tiny bit there with our secondary colors. Let's see, back and forth, something like that, so that I have here nice shades of green, so the colder green and that warmer green. And we will use that combination now to improve our photo by combining that with multiple instances of color balance. So let's go back to Darktable. Let's do that. Go back to the Darktable. And I will also make sure that our window with Paletone is always in the foreground. And now let's see what can we do. Okay, let's adjust our greens first. So I will add a new instance of color balance. I will call that greens and adjust the greens. But first I need to mask the greens only. So let's use our parametric mask. Let's use color picker. I don't know, something like that. Let's see how the masks looks like. Okay, that's okay. Maybe add some feathering. I don't know, maybe too much yellow. Let's see. Oh no. Let's go back. And the mask is adjusted, but I'm not sure if I like to adjust I would like to influence our fountain. So let's use also luminance mask and see where is our fountain, something like that. Maybe that much. We're going back so that we don't influence our water too much, something like that. Okay, that looks nice. Now we're going to 4 ways and we have this combination, so we need a bit more in the darker greens. We need a bit more bluish, similar like before. So let's do that first. Something like that. And on the brighter we need that reddish or yellowish, maybe also a tiny bit of chroma here, so that looks similar. These colors should be looking like that, and this one like that. As you can see, we are quite near. So let's leave it there and deal with other colors. Now we want to have blue in the sky. So let's add new instance of the color balance for the blues. Rename it to blue. And we need to mask, of course, our sky with a parametric mask. So let's see what we can get there. That's quite nice. Don't need to do much. Maybe more in the blue, something like that, so that we cover everything here. That should be enough. Okay, now we have this blue here. So that should be something like that. Let's see how we can improve that. Maybe also in midtones. Yeah. And highlights, I don't know. Highlights doesn't need too much. They can be desaturated. Okay, now we have that blue colors adjusted. And let's adjust as last step, let's adjust some reds. The same procedure as before. Let's choose those colors here maybe. Oh, they are too yellowish, so we have that more or less. That's enough. We don't need to be so precise. And now that needs to be a bit orangey, so let's improve that. That's too much. Don't want to do midtones. How about midtones there? Yeah, that's good. And tiny bit of yellow in the highlights. Okay, now we have set up our three colors. Let's rename this one to the reds. And let's improve each other a bit more now. Let's go to the greens. I would like to add tiny bit of luminance to the highlights of the greens. Remove the power there. Maybe go to the master tab, remove the global chroma, but add that saturation. I'm not going to, no, that's too much removing. No, let's leave it back. Maybe something like that, because the greens are much important in our photo. So that looks nice. Let's see how to improve the sky a little bit. Maybe darken the sky, so we will use global offset and shadows lift and even power here to darken tiny bits of this area. And maybe also use the brilliance for that. Let's see how far we can go, and add some saturation, but on shadows and midtones. Before and after. Yeah, that's quite subtle and nice improvement. Maybe even add some more chroma here, vibrance, I don't know, so that we have a bit more of that bluish look. Yeah, that's nice. And let's improve all reds now. I don't know, I don't think we'd need too much saturation here. So let's remove chroma here, but add some in shadows and midtones. And go back. I think that was something like that. So I think we have improved that a little bit. The last touch I would like to do is to give some depth to the photos, so I will use one more exposure module to, so let's bring that back, exposure module to add some dodging and burning in the middle, for example here, and let's say toggle our mask off, give it some radius, feathering radius, and darken those areas, and go back to the first exposure and add a bit more exposure to this one, so that we have now that middle part much more brighter. And I think we have quite nice color combination. Now let's see how that looks before and after. So let's go back to the what was interesting point. Let's so say exposure here. Take a snapshot, go to the last step of exposure and see before and after. You can see quite a difference. I could also add tiny bit overall saturation with new instance of color balance. Let's call it saturation after our dealing with colors, so that we have, yeah, oh, that is how I love the look of that photo. Now let's try that again with before and after, but without that how it's called, color assessment conditions. So let's go back to our exposure, or even Filmic. That's better. Take that snapshot, go back to the last step, and look at that difference. That is much better, because we have dealt with colors in some interesting way. We have darkened the sky, give it some bluish touch. Now we have improved our greens, because now we have that distinction between those brighter greens and darker greens. That's not only by luminance but also by color. So we have a much more depth in those colors, and we have distinction between those greens and other areas which are a bit reddish. And now we have a nice composition with those harmony rules. As you can see, it looks great. Now, that's all for this episode. I will make one more with few more examples of color grading with combination of color balance and color calibration. Okay, thank you for watching, and until the next time.